This table has a lot of responsibility.
Yes. Table, son, please don't fall.
Hey, so before we jump into the main section of this video, we're just time traveling from the future here, but we just watched the video edit and we think, first of all, this video is like jam-packed with some really cool information, and we get to play. I mean, you'll see. I won't spoil it. But on the other hand, this is a new format that we're trying, these longer kind of videos, and we notice we do sound kind of a little bit serious at times. It gets a bit more like educational, and we're just a little bit worried, like if we post this, will people think like, oh, we become like National Geographic or something?
National Geographic.
I mean, nothing, no shade on them. I love watching like freaking elephants, but my point being.
Right, okay.
You might already know that elephants are large and majestic.
My point being, we decided just because, so much effort has been going through this and there is so much cool stuff that we're going to post it, we'd be open to feedback and let us know if you like this type of video or if there's any suggestions that you have to make. Would you prefer that we made it funnier, or maybe you like it that we just stop trying to be funny because we're not that funny anyway?
Yeah, we're not funny anymore. Comes with old age, I'm done. Enjoy the facts, have fun with the National Geographic episode.
An adult elephant has to consume an enormous amount.
In 2011, the Lady Blunt Stradivarius violin was sold for $15.9 million, marking it as the most expensive publicly sold violin at the time. 1 year later, the Violins Guarneri violin was reportedly sold in private for over $16 million to an anonymous buyer. So why do these violins cost so much money? 2012, that amount of money you could buy a mansion. In comparison, the most expensive piano ever sold was only for $3.4 million at an auction in 2014, and it was the one used in the film Casablanca. And the most expensive flute was the Verne Q Power Flute, which sold for $187,000 at the Christie's auction in 1986, roughly $500,000 in today's currency.
In today's video, we're going to explore the world of ultra expensive violins and ask the million-dollar question, are they worth it?
So if you look at the most expensive violins ever sold, you'll notice that a few names repeatedly appear. And that's because when it comes to the instrument market, the number one determining factor of how expensive an instrument is usually the maker's name. And so in order to understand a bit more, we should first delve into the history of violin makers.
In the mid-16th century, the young King Charles IX of France, who ascended to the throne in 1560, was seeking to elevate the cultural and musical prestige of his court. At that time, the French royal court was a hub of artistic activity, and the king wanted to showcase the best that Europe had to offer. This desire led him to commission a set of musical instruments from a man named Andrea Amati. At the time, Amati was actually already developing a reputation as one of the best violin makers in Cremona. The commission from King Charles was a monumental task. Amati was to create a complete set of stringed instruments, 24 violins, 6 violas, and 8 cellos for the French royal court. This commission not only affirmed the status of the violin as a central instrument in classical music, but also solidified Amati's reputation as the best luthier of his time. These instruments were not just musical tools, they were works of art, each one meticulously crafted and decorated, with some featuring the French royal coat of arms. Andrea had 2 sons, Antonio and Girolamo, I'm sorry if I butchered that, better known as the brothers Amati. They continued their father's legacy, and while the instruments were great, they are considered slightly lower quality than their fathers. Here's an important thing to remember if you're buying a violin. They're usually a family business. So you have to remember that a lot of the times they use the same family surname. If you're looking at an Amati, be sure to check that it was crafted by Andrea Amati or one of his sons or grandsons, as this can significantly impact the instrument's market value. Girolamo Amati had a son named Niccolo Amati, who would later become a crucial figure in the history of violins. In 1630, a plague swept through Italy, resulting in the deaths of Niccolo Amati's parents and other family members. The plague was followed by a severe famine, furthering the death and suffering in the region. The same plague went on to kill another prominent maker, Gio Paolo Maggini. in effect leaving Niccolò as the only surviving violin maker of quality in Italy. However, soon after the plague, the demand for instruments continued to increase. This demand created further problems for Niccolò. He needed help expanding business, but since he didn't have children at the time, and many of his family members died from the plague, Niccolò had no choice but to break the family tradition and employ non-family members. While we cannot know for certain who or how many people Niccolò employed, the general consensus is that almost every first-ranked violin maker in the beginning of the 1700s was a student of Niccolò, either directly or indirectly. Thus, Niccolò could be said as one of the most influential violin makers of all time, being the one to disseminate the Cremonese school of violin making all across Europe. In general, instruments of the Amati family were known to be sweet, delicate, and intimate. Because they tend to be not so powerful, they often struggle to project in big concert halls.
Now, remember how we said that Niccolo Amati employed a lot of different students in his workshop? Well, one of them was a man named Antonio Stradivari. And he would continue on to become the most famous name in violin making history. So famous that the name has even entered pop culture over 300 years later.
Stradivari?
While the beginning of Stradivari's career is shrouded in mystery, most believe that he likely studied under Niccolò. However, there's not much evidence other than a violin made in 1666, which was labeled Anonymous Nicolai Amati. What's special about Stradivari was that he continued to push and innovate throughout his entire career, well into old age. His career is often categorized into 4 unique periods. In the early period, his violins were heavily influenced by Niccolo Amati, featuring smaller, more delicate proportions. So we're here today at Nippon Violin, and we're very lucky to have 5 Stradivarius violins with us. And we have here, right now, a violin that Strad made in 1687. These violins have an elegant appearance, with a slightly arched belly and back and narrow purfling.
I hope it looks small.
They're known to be less projecting, less strong. But even this still feels
Very strong.
very solid. And there's definitely that sweetness of the sound. Then, around 1690s, Stradivari began to experiment. And one of the ways he did this was by lengthening the body of the violin by over 1 centimeter. And hence, this period is called the long pattern Strads. Violins from this period had a flatter arching for the top and back, and the varnish shifted to a richer, deeper hue. Unfortunately, we don't have one with us here right now. Finally, we reached the 1700s in what is known as Stradivari's golden period. This period produced some of the most famous violins, including the 1714 Soil and the 1715 Marsic. Stradivari's craftsmanship reached its peak throughout these years. During this time, Strad reduced the length of the body back down to roughly 357 millimeters. So we have here 2 golden period Strads. This one is from 1703, and this one from 1718. Can't believe I'm holding 2 of these right now. It's crazy. So, during his golden period, he made the middle bout slightly wider, contributing to a fuller, richer sound. The flatter arch for the top and back compared to the earlier models, which helped enhance power and projection. The flatter arch also allows for greater string tension, which creates a bigger sound. Hence, many soloists prefer the golden period Strads.
Still pretty good.
So this 1718 violin is very special also because there's a little special marking here. And it's the only one in the world where he's done this. It was a gift, a violin that he gifted to someone. And imagine having bread.
The price will go. No, it's just...
I don't know if you can tell from the mic, but here it's very obvious the golden periods sound different.
Yeah, it's very, it's
I'd say it's like brighter and just a bit more like, it's got a bit more of that.
Yeah, it's got that kind of like core. I mean, not saying that doesn't have a core, but it's got the kind of powerful core to it. Like, it's like it's here. It's more presence.
There's more aura.
Yeah, aura.
And now in his mid-70s, Stradivari continued to make violins all the way into his 90s. These final years are often referred to as late period. The violins during this time are a little bit less refined, possibly due to his older age, or maybe because his sons, Francesco and Omobono, started to play a gradually increasing role in helping their father make the violins. Despite the slight decline in craftsmanship, many of his late violins still boast a powerful and rich sound. So we have a 1726 here, and it's a 1732. So he would have been 88 years old. What a baller.
Can you imagine at 88 back then?
That's pretty gangster, making violins like that. What's very special too is the 1725 to 1728 period of Strad, he used a very special wood that was very distinct to all his other violins. And so you can kind of see it here in this one, the back, different than the other Strads. Cool thing was this Strad in particular is called the Chrysler Strad because it was owned and played on by Chrysler, Fritz Chrysler, legendary violinist. So this is literally a piece of history that we're holding.
Nice.
Wish we could keep playing on them, but... Alright, so the last one we have here is 1732.
When it was made when he was 88 years old.
That's insane. Please don't mind the other tune playing. While there are originally estimated around 1,100 instruments made by Stradivari, we only have around 650 of them left today. Now, the final maker of significant importance today is Guarneri del Gesù, who is part of the famous Guarneri dynasty, who, by the way, also learnt under Niccolo Amati. In the 1700s, while Stradivari's and Amati's were favored by European courts, Guarneri violins were more commonly used by working musicians. Guarneri's work was once dismissed as second-rate and poorly executed, and his violins were much more affordable in the early 1800s, costing only 2 to 3 zecchini compared to the much higher prices of Stradivari, 10 zecchini, and Amati, up to 40 zecchini per instrument. Ironically, these days, the Strads and Guarneris are of the same price, while the Amatis are a lot cheaper, although still very expensive. Del Gesù's violin remained primarily in Italy until Paganini's first European tour in 1828. Paganini, recognizing the extraordinary power of Del Gesù's violin, captivated audiences with his 1743 Guarneri known as Il Canon, or the Canon. What a name. It has quickly become a favored instrument, earning the nickname My Violin Canon due to its rich, resonant sound. As to how Paganini got his hands on the Guarneri, that's a story for another day. Despite his lineage, Del Gesù temporarily left violin making after adolescence. The reason for his hiatus was unclear, but he returned around age 30, likely to support his financially struggling father. But given this hiatus, he made a lot less violins, and there's only 150 Del Gesùs existing today. Thus, their scarcity also adds to the higher value. Like Stradivarius, Guarneri also liked to innovate a lot. He moved away from traditional techniques, experimenting with design elements like F-holes and plate thickness to create violins with a distinctive, wild sound. Okay, so we now have 2 Guarneri del Gesùs. Okay, so this is crazy. This is from 1716. Keep in mind, Guarneri del Gesù, he was born in 1698. So this means he made this when he was 18 years old. And that's very rare to see like a violin of this quality.
1738. Wow, look at the back. That's some crazy stuff. Nice.
His violins are known for their rugged and powerful appearance, often featuring asymmetrical and roughly carved scrolls. Their outlines are broader with robust corners, and the varnish tends to be darker and more matte. Guarneri's work embraces irregularities with F-holes that are often slightly uneven and visible tool marks. Other than Paganini, several other reputable violinists also choose Del Gesù as their violin of choice, including the legendary Jascha Heifetz.
While Strad, Amati, and Guarneri are the three big names, there were many other violin makers that came after them that also made a name for themselves, such as Guillaume, Guarneri, Storioni, and Gagliano.
Okay, lastly, we have today here two Guarneri violins, which is also very special and very rare to have two with us. One is a 1752, which was made when he was in Milan. And then we have a 1769, which was made when he moved to Parma. The first thing I noticed straight away is the arch is even flatter. The top
Crazy, it's like much flatter.
It feels so flat.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's so flat.
And also I noticed, it just means the F-holes look really big.
Yeah, they're much wider too, in this period.
Look at those F-holes, they're massive. If these are eyes, these be like those girls with the massive contact lenses.
Nice.
And then the Parma one. Warmer?
It's warm, yeah. I don't know if it's as sweet as the Strad, but
Yes.
you know what I mean?
Yeah. Now the question everyone naturally asks is, are these violins really that much better that they justify the insane prices? What we can do is listen and consult some expert opinions. 1734 Strad article, this is what Cavicos had to say about his Stradivari violin. The Wilmot is a very robust, powerful instrument. It has a refined, perfumed kind of tone quality under the ear. Yet when I hear someone else play it in a concert hall, it has an incredibly complex, multi-dimensional character. It's super sensitive and responds to everything I try to do with it. 3 years after buying it, I'm still discovering a spiritual, ethereal quality to the sound, which comes from everywhere and nowhere. It's a kind of presence that permeates everything I play. It never stops surprising me.
And this is what Augustin Hardelik had to say about his Guarneri. The sound of this violin has a richness and complexity that I have rarely heard in any instrument. The moment I played the Le Duc del Gesù, something in the sound drew me to the violin, and I did not want to stop playing. I love the vocal, human quality of the sound of this violin. In my first performances with the Le Duc, its sound filled the largest halls effortlessly, and every piece I play right now feels like a new and wonderful discovery. These comments and many more like it reflect the general sentiment in the community that these legendary violins have more character, nuance, and complexity in their sound. Some like to call it a soul.
Yeah, I remember when we had our Strads and we had a conversation with James Ennis, and we were talking about how the Strads, when you play them, initially it might feel weird, but it's like the Strads almost has its own colors for you to explore.
Yeah.
And then so you get inspired to make new sounds that you didn't even know was possible to make in a normal violin.
Yeah.
And it's kind of weird because even later when you move away from the Strad, it's like you're inspired to try and recreate those sounds in other violins that kind of just, the Strads almost invites you to explore. So there are several theories as to why these older instruments may be superior to modern ones. One theory is that the wood in the 1600s and 1700s were different. The years 1645 to 1715, also known as the Maunder Minimum, had longer winters and cooler summers that resulted in slower, more even tree growth. The wood from this time had denser, less pronounced tree rings, which likely enhanced the sound vibrations of the wood, contributing to better resonance. Another theory that has gained popularity is the idea that Stradivari had a secret sauce or unique formula for his varnish. Unlike the dimensions and proportions of the violin, which can easily be scanned and modeled, experts have not been able to deduce exactly 100% of what the varnish is made out of. Research conducted by the German Chemical Society delved into the chemical properties and composition of Stradivari's violin. The study highlights the significance of specific varnishes and wood treatments used by Stradivari, which are believed to enhance acoustic properties. Researchers from Texas A&M University also found that Stradivari used specific chemical treatments on the wood, which altered its properties to enhance acoustic performance. A more contrarian theory is that perhaps because these violins were always famous and always played by the legendary soloists, that we as a culture and the community has learned to equate the sound of these violins as what we define as good. So there's always that possibility as well. But these are some of the reasons why even the best, highest quality modern instruments today are still way cheaper than the likes of Stradivari and Guarneri.
Aside from the maker of the violin, there are two other major factors that affects the price of the violin. The first is the condition of the violin. Making sure that the violin is in a great condition and made fully by the same maker is one of the most important criteria. A damaged violin can seriously impact its value. A violin with a non-original scroll can lose a third of its price.
There is a silver lining to the situation though, which means if you really want to buy a violin from a particular maker, but you can't afford it at its full price, you can often get one that might have had some damages but repaired and it still sounds amazing, but now at a much discounted price.
Still expensive. The fact that damaging a violin can cause such a significant price drop is also why almost everyone who buys an expensive instrument insures it. Instrument insurance is actually a very common thing.
And the final main factor that affects how much a violin costs is which famous violinists have played on it before. This is otherwise known as provenance. So a typical Guarneri del Gesù will cost between $4 to $12 million. However, the 1743 Il Canon, once owned by Paganini, was valued at $30 million. Likewise, the 1741 Violton del Gesù, owned by Belgian virtuoso Henri Violton, sold for over $16 million. Since the maker of the violin and its history plays such a big role on its price, naturally this has led to many fakes in the market, where people would attach false labels onto a violin to try and pass it off as another maker's violin. In this industry, we have very trusted experts whose job is to correctly identify and authenticate instruments. With deep knowledge of craftsmanship, materials, and historical context, they thoroughly examine violins, considering construction, varnish, identifying marks, and provenance. Their expertise ensures genuine instruments are correctly identified, preventing forgeries and preserving market trust. That's also why when you buy an instrument, make sure to get it authenticated properly by a credible source. And once you have the certificate, don't lose it. At the end of the day, musical instruments for us musicians serves a very functional, although also an emotional role. But what we want is an instrument that sounds good so we can make the music we wish to make. However, as you can see, the price of the violin often has very little to do with how it actually sounds or its playability, and instead be influenced by factors such as the maker's name, history, provenance, and condition. And for these reasons, fine instruments have also become a form of currency or source of investment for the wealthy and those that can afford it. In fact, if you look at the period between 1960 to 2005, we can see that the price of gold has increased 1,500%, whereas that of fine instruments increased by 19,400%. And since 2005, the prices have continued to skyrocket. So ultimately, the extremely high price of violins is a combination of many factors. Part of it is the quality and the craftsmanship from these makers, but part of it is also the cultural legacy and just the scarcity of these violins from these legendary makers. While these instruments are, on one hand, functional tools for musicians to make music, there's so much more than that. They're also pieces of cultural history and symbolic of artistic excellence. On the flip side, due to the current market valuing these violins so high, many musicians, especially violinists and string players, are finding it increasingly difficult to own a quality instrument. And this can be very, very frustrating. On one hand, we have people like Sota from Nippon Violin doing such an important and amazing job to connect these investors and the instruments with amazing musicians so that they get to be learned and play on these instruments in concerts. So really thank you for what you do.
Thank you. I'm proud to have you here and all the instruments here. So some of the instruments I asked to just return a little bit for this special movie.
Wow.
And it's almost impossible to have this together at the same time, same place in Tokyo.
Thank you. Thank you all for watching.
Bye-bye.
Bye.